Elizabeth Warren is not going to endorse Bernie Sanders. Nobody is surprised about this, and this was confirmed by the New York Times, who just published an article saying she is unlikely to endorse Bernie Sanders. But I'm still fascinated by this story because even if I knew Elizabeth Warren was a disappointment coming into 2020, it truly is astonishing how little she cares about a progressive agenda. She genuinely couldn't care less. She, wants to be a progressive, according to her, but when push comes to shove, she lets us down. She doesn't stand up for progressive policies. And this goes beyond 2020. We're talking back in 2016, when the Standing Rock Sioux tribe was being brutalized by militarized police. She said nothing. When Bernie was running a very competitive primary against Hillary Clinton, and he did it begrudgingly because she refused to challenge the Clinton machine, she sat idly by and didn't endorse until after the primary was over. So this really, if you're new to politics and you're a new Bernie supporter, disappointment with Elizabeth Warren, it goes further back than 2020. But we get a little bit of insight into the reasoning as to why she's not endorsing, and it's not surprising, but it's still very, very pathetic. So as the New York Times reports, Miss Warren is expected to withhold her endorsement from Mr. Sanders as well as Mr. Biden at this point, choosing to let the primary play out rather than seek to change its course, according to several people familiar with Miss Warren's thinking who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss her considerations. Even before Mr. Sanders lost 4 states in Tuesday's primaries, dealing a huge blow to his presidential hopes, Miss Warren was reluctant to support him. These people said the spirited presidential campaign caused some rifts between the two liberals, including their clash in January over whether Mr. Sanders once told her that a woman couldn't be elected president in 2020, an episode that deeply troubled her. Her camp also viewed Mr. Sanders' electoral standing as fading in recent weeks, raising doubts about whether an endorsement would be a lost cause. Ms. Warren has spoke to Mr. Biden once since Super Tuesday, but multiple times to Mr. Sanders, as she and her team have fielded overtures from Sanders supporters seeking to coax her to his aid. Randi Weingarten, who is a Warren surrogate, just FYI, said she looked back at the January episode between Miss Warren and Mr. Sanders as a crucial juncture in their relationship. Quote, there were a lot of really nasty emojis and tweets and other vituperative and misogynistic comments directed toward Elizabeth, and that was a moment Bernie could have stood really clearly and said, enough. Miss Weingarten said, I'm a pretty tough broad and it affected me, and I don't get affected by this much anymore. The candidates have a role at that moment to step up and provide moral authority, she added. People took note. There was a sense of PTSD, Miss Weingarten said, harking back to the 2016 primary campaign against Mrs. Clinton. Did it affect Miss Warren? You can't discount what happened over the last few months, Miss Weingarten said. Let me just leave it at that. In other words, it actually was the snake emojis. And, people were getting offended for Elizabeth Warren, such as Randi Weingarten, because of the snake emojis. And that's one of the reasons, to be fair, why she is not going to endorse Bernie Sanders. They also state that, it looks like he doesn't have a path to the nomination in their view, in their estimation, so they're going to sit this one out because it doesn't really make a difference. And if you endorse a losing candidate, then you kind of lose leverage and power. Except, what's the point of endorsing then? If you dropped out and endorsed Bernie Sanders before Super Tuesday, would that have made a difference? I genuinely don't know. Maybe a little bit. But what I do know is that it would have at least communicated to progressives that you cared about progressive policies. Even if that would have been the hardest thing that you'd ever had, to do in your life, it still would have shown a real dedication and self-sacrifice for the movement. So it doesn't matter. Are you saying that you'd only endorse someone who's going to win? Because that's absolutely just, that's a coward position to take. Embarrassing. Now, when it comes to the snake emojis, I just want to remind everyone that the snake emojis, they didn't just materialize out of nowhere. What were the snake emojis? Why were people posting snake emojis underneath Elizabeth Warren's tweets? It was because she lied about Bernie Sanders. She lied very obviously about Bernie Sanders at a time when he was surging. She decided to have her team leak this story right before Iowa. Why wasn't this leaked back when Bernie Sanders announced? Why wasn't this leaked in the middle of 2019? This was leaked right before Iowa, and it's not believable because this is very uncharacteristic of Bernie Sanders. He tried to get Elizabeth Warren to run back in 2016. She said no. So the fact that he thinks a woman couldn't win, nobody believes that. Not a single person believes that. So the snake emojis were a direct response to what was a very obvious lie and desperate attempt to smear Bernie Sanders in hopes that you could bring down his momentum before Iowa and capitalize on, his demise potentially. And on top of that, the continuation of snake emojis were the result of Elizabeth Warren just attacking Bernie Sanders nonstop, right? She lied about him having a super PAC. She, said, oh, well, it's only the 2 women who don't have a super PAC. And then she went on to have one of the largest super PACs in the race after lying about Bernie Sanders, because apparently Our Revolution and Sunrise Movement, those are super PACs according to Elizabeth Warren, if we're using her logic, but she sought the endorsement of the Sunrise Movement. So did Pete Buttigieg. But then after he was rejected, he qualified them as a dark money group. I mean, do you not understand? Cause and effect is a very real thing. If you hurt people, if you are perceived to be against our movement and what we're fighting for, saving lives, helping people, then be lucky that we only decided to send you snake emojis, right? And not campaign against you more in your home state. Right? Not try to mount some type of progressive primary challenger to you in 2024. Not that that's out of, the possibility, but I'm just saying, if snake emojis is the worst case scenario that you'll face when you betray an entire movement by lying about its leader, then I think that's pretty good, no? And I'm sorry, but primary campaigns are incredibly divisive. I mean, they get heated sometimes. Look at the primary campaign between Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton back in 2008. That got ugly. And most of the ugliness came from Hillary Clinton, who leaked a photo of Barack Obama in a turban so she could fearmonger about him, which was racist. And on top of that, she stayed in the race after she was literally mathematically eliminated because she said, well, what if he gets assassinated? I'm paraphrasing, but that was the sentiment. In case he died, she could become the nominee. That's why she wanted to stay in. So primaries get ugly, but at the end of the day, she was his Secretary of State. You put all of that aside because you've got to care more about the issues than, your own pettiness. Now, I'm not saying that Hillary Clinton cares about the issues, but they put that aside. That's the point. So the fact that Elizabeth Warren was genuinely that angry over snake emojis, I think it really gives us some insight into just how privileged she is. This is a multimillionaire, right? She is a member of the United States Senate, and she's white. So if snake emojis is the worst thing that she's had to deal with, wow, what an amazing life you must have. What an amazing life you must have. There are people in this country who are fighting with everything that they have for Bernie Sanders because they desperately need Medicare for all. I saw an article that brought tears to my eyes that a Bernie volunteer made 200 calls for him the day before he died of cancer. We're fighting for our lives here. And for Elizabeth Warren to not understand where we're coming from, not understand the pain and suffering and the fear among young people of just the collapse of our environment, it's just embarrassing. The fact that they're truly talking about snake emojis this much is embarrassing. And, we knew that this was irritating her because in an interview with Rachel Maddow, once again, she brought up that, Bernie Sanders should have spoke out more about the snake emojis.
It's a particular problem with Sanders' supporters.
It is. And it just is. It's just a factual question. And it is. And that's something I think that...
Have you ever talked with Senator Sanders about that?
I have.
What was that conversation like?
It was short. But yeah, we've talked about it. But I think it's a real problem.
Does he not share your view that he's responsible for the behavior of supporters?
You know, I shouldn't speak for him. It's something he should speak for himself on. But I do think it's something that we need to reckon with in our political discourse in particular, because this is what politics is about, is to get out and put your ideas out there. People choose sides, people vote, people say, I'm holding a sign for her, I'm holding a sign for him. That is part of what we do. But what underlies that is a fundamental human decency and respect for each other. An understanding that nobody tries to put somebody's family at risk or somebody personally at risk because they disagree with you on the politics of it, because they see the policy different, because they don't support your candidate and they support some other candidate. No. And if we follow that same kind of politics of division that Donald Trump follows, that notion of, he draws strength from tearing people apart, from demonizing people, from saying, oh, those are bad people, and that's kind of how they draw their strength. It's not who I want to be as a Democrat. It's not who I want to be as an American. And to the extent I have any power to control that, I do what I can, and I call on others to do the same. And I think we have to have some accountability around that.
So, I mean, we're all responsible for our supporters, except she hasn't taken responsibility for any of her supporters' actions. No other candidate has taken responsibility for the actions of their supporters. And a new article by, I think, Salon showed that from a data standpoint, the Bernie bro narrative is nothing more than a myth. There's no evidence suggesting that Bernie supporters are more hostile than any other candidate's supporters. This was true back in 2016 as well, where Hillary Clinton supporters were way more aggressive than Bernie Sanders supporters, but yet we were labeled as the hostile Bernie bros. Now, the fact that Elizabeth Warren decided to not only buy into that narrative, but further perpetuate it, it just shows you everything you need to know about Elizabeth Warren. She's not serious about progressive policies, because if she was serious about progressive policies, it wouldn't be difficult to make an endorsement. Like if the shoe were on the other foot and Bernie Sanders had lost Iowa and New Hampshire, do you honestly believe that he would have stayed in the race? He would have dropped out and campaigned hard for Elizabeth Warren. And after all of this, if she chooses to run in 2024, he might still campaign hard for her. But guess what? We're not going to be there for Elizabeth Warren in 2024. If you repeatedly slap this movement in the face and you abandon us, then when you really need us the most, maybe then we'll be the ones abandoning you for once, Elizabeth Warren. So you're pathetic. Shame on you, you privileged rich person. You should be ashamed of yourself. You should absolutely be ashamed of yourself. You are going to go down in history as the progressive who was too much of a coward to actually fight for what she believed in. And, you became what you hated. You became what you hated. You stood around long enough to be what everyone dislikes about electoral politics. Someone who's just jockeying for power positions, who's a careerist more than anything. All right, not surprising, but don't expect my support.